The year was 2025, and life in the small suburban town moved at its usual slow pace. Families trusted their neighbors, children played freely on the sidewalks, and the sound of laughter often filled the streets during the evenings. It was the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked, and everyone felt that nothing truly bad could happen there. Among the children of this town were two brothers, Michael, who was 9 years old, and Ethan, who was 7. Michael was the more serious of the two. He loved reading comic books, playing with his toy robots, and trying to act like a little adult. Ethan, on the other hand, was the opposite, cheerful, full of jokes, and always looking for something to laugh about. The two balanced each other perfectly. If Michael ever felt worried, Ethan would make a silly face and dissolve his brother's fear. If Ethan became careless, Michael would remind him to be cautious. Their parents, David and Sarah, often said that their boys were inseparable, more like best friends than just brothers. It was an ordinary Thursday afternoon in early spring when things began to change. The sun was still high in the sky, the air smelled of fresh-cut grass, and the boys were walking home from school. Their mother had packed their favorite snacks at home, and she expected them to return by 4 o'clock, like always. But as time ticked away, 4 o'clock became 4:30, and then 5, with no sign of Michael or Ethan. At first, Sarah thought they might have stopped at a friend's house. It wasn't unusual for the boys to linger a little if one of their classmates invited them to play. She called a few neighbors, but none of them had seen the children that day. By 6 o'clock, David had returned home from work, and both parents began to worry. The uneasiness in their stomachs grew into panic when they walked down the street, calling out their sons' names, only to hear silence echo back. Neighbors noticed their concern and came out to help. Some grabbed flashlights, others began checking the nearby park and playground. A few people walked along the wooded path that connected the school to the residential area. The town, though small, had plenty of places where two curious boys could wander. But as night fell, there was no laughter, no footsteps, and no sign of the children. By 7:30, Sarah could no longer hold back her tears. David tried to stay calm, but his voice cracked when he finally picked up the phone and called the police. Within an hour, patrol cars with flashing lights arrived. Officers spread out, asking questions, checking corners, and calling in more help. Search dogs were brought in to track the boys' scent, and volunteers gathered at the local community center, ready to fan out across the area. The sight was heartbreaking, parents clutching photos of their sons, neighbors whispering in disbelief, officers moving with urgency. For years, this community had believed they were safe from the dangers often seen on the news. But now, the headlines seemed to have landed right at their doorstep. Throughout the night, the search continued. Helicopters hovered above with bright lights sweeping across the fields. Volunteers walked shoulder to shoulder through the wooded areas, calling out, "Michael! Ethan!" Yet the woods only answered back with the rustling of leaves and the sound of night insects. Sarah stayed awake the entire night, sitting on the porch with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, waiting for any news. David paced back and forth, speaking with officers, trying to cling to the hope that this was just a misunderstanding and that the boys would walk back through the door at any moment. The next morning brought no relief. News channels arrived with their cameras, broadcasting the story across the region. The image of Michael and Ethan smiling in their school photos flashed on every screen, alongside the word missing. Reporters interviewed tearful relatives and friends, showing the community's desperation to find the boys. People from nearby towns began arriving to join the search. Flyers were taped to poles, shop windows, and car windshields. Everywhere one looked, the boys' faces stared back, their innocent smiles a painful reminder of what was missing. Detectives visited the school to ask questions. Teachers remembered seeing the boys leave together, laughing as they walked down the sidewalk. A crossing guard swore she saw them heading in the right direction, toward their neighborhood. But after that, the trail seemed to vanish. No one had seen them enter a store, hop on a bus, or even turn into the street they lived on. It was as if the earth had quietly swallowed them up. As the hours stretched into another long day, theories began to spread. Some whispered that maybe the boys had tried to run away, though those who knew them found that impossible. Michael and Ethan loved their parents too much to vanish by choice. Others feared a stranger might have taken them, though no one could imagine something so dark happening in their small town. Still, every possibility was investigated, because no one was willing to give up. The second night was even harder for David and Sarah. Exhaustion weighed heavily on them, but neither could rest. Sarah clutched Ethan's favorite stuffed animal in her hands, pressing it to her chest as though holding onto a piece of her son. Michael's comic books sat open on the table, waiting for a reader who hadn't returned. Their house, usually filled with the sound of the boys' playful arguments and laughter, felt unbearably silent. The police assured the parents that they would not stop searching. They reviewed camera footage from streets, gas stations, and shops. Officers knocked on doors, asked strangers for information, and chased every lead, no matter how small. Still, no answers came. On the third morning, the entire town woke with heavy hearts. Church bells rang as groups gathered to pray for the boys' safe return. Candlelight vigils were organized in front of the school. The missing children had become the focus of every conversation, every thought, every fear. For the parents, every second felt like a year. They lived between hope and despair, not knowing if they would see their children again. That was when, far away from the neighborhood and the search areas, something unexpected began to unfold. While police and volunteers combed through familiar grounds, the answer to the mystery was sitting unnoticed in an unlikely place waiting for someone ordinary to pay attention and see what others had missed. And though the parents could not know it yet, their nightmare was about to turn toward a fragile but hopeful direction. The sun rose slowly on the second day, casting a pale golden light over the quiet town. Normally, mornings were filled with the sound of school buses, children chatting on sidewalks, and parents waving goodbye before heading to work. But on this morning, the atmosphere was heavy. The disappearance of Michael and Ethan had become the only thing anyone could think about. Posters with the boys' photos had been printed overnight. Volunteers carried stacks of them to pin on poles, trees, shop windows, and car doors. Everywhere people turned, those smiling faces reminded them that 2 young lives were still missing. Detectives set up a command post at the community center. Maps were pinned to walls, with circles marking search areas. Police officers, volunteers, and even strangers from nearby towns came to help. They divided into groups, each assigned a different route: the woods, the riverbank, the bus stops, the train station, and even the open fields beyond the suburbs. Sarah and David were at the center too, clinging to each other for strength. Sarah's eyes were swollen from crying, her voice hoarse from calling out her son's names for hours. David tried to stay strong for both of them, but his hands trembled as he held the microphone during a press conference. Standing beside him, Sarah read a plea written on a piece of paper that shook in her hands. "Please, if anyone has seen our boys, even the smallest detail, please come forward. Michael and Ethan are everything to us." Her words were broadcast live across television screens and phones. Viewers from distant cities watched as the couple begged for their children's return. Strangers who had never met the boys felt their hearts break, and some even drove hours to join the search. As the day stretched on, officers followed every possible lead. Someone reported seeing 2 children at a gas station, but the security footage showed it was a different pair of kids. Another person claimed to have heard laughter near the river at night, but after hours of searching, there was nothing. Each false lead drained more energy, but no one was willing to stop. The community's sense of unity grew stronger. Restaurants donated food to feed searchers. A local printing shop made thousands of extra flyers without charging a single cent. Churches opened their doors for prayer gatherings. Even teenagers who normally spent their days on social media showed up to comb through fields, holding flashlights and calling out into the dark. But despite the unity, fear was never far away. Parents gripped their children's hands tighter, afraid to let them walk alone. Schools shortened outdoor recess. Doors that had once been left unlocked were now double-bolted. This was not the life the town was used to. It felt as though an invisible shadow had fallen across every home. Meanwhile, detectives interviewed anyone who might have known the boys' routines. Teachers described Michael as a thoughtful student who loved science projects and Ethan as an energetic boy who made everyone laugh. Friends admitted that the brothers usually walked straight home after school, rarely stopping along the way. A crossing guard swore she had seen them together near the playground, but what happened after that remained a mystery. Police dogs were sent again to trace the boys' scent. They sniffed around the school grounds, the sidewalks, and the wooded path nearby. At one point, the dogs barked near a cluster of trees, but after hours of searching, nothing was found. The trail seemed to end there, leaving detectives frustrated and puzzled. Inside their home, Sarah tried to hold on to hope by preparing the boys' favorite snacks, leaving them on the kitchen table as if they might walk in at any moment. She folded their laundry, touching each shirt and pair of socks with trembling hands, whispering their names. David, on the other hand, buried himself in activity. He walked with search parties, knocked on doors, and spoke with officers. Every time he thought he saw a clue, a footprint, a piece of clothing, his heart leapt, only to sink when it turned out to belong to someone else. By late afternoon, the press conference footage had spread across social media. Hashtags with the boys' names appeared everywhere. People from different states shared the missing posters, hoping someone, somewhere, would recognize them. News anchors described the disappearance as one of the most concerning cases the region had seen in years. That evening, another vigil was held. Hundreds of people gathered with candles, their flickering lights glowing like tiny stars in the darkness. Songs were sung, prayers whispered, and tears shed. Sarah stood at the front, clutching Ethan's stuffed animal in one hand and Michael's comic book in the other. She spoke softly, her voice breaking, "They are strong. They are together. I believe we will see them again." Her words, though heavy with sorrow, carried a fragile thread of hope that touched everyone present. But as the second night began, the weight of uncertainty grew harder to bear. In the police station, detectives reviewed hours of camera footage from shops and traffic lights. They slowed videos frame by frame, hoping to catch sight of the boys. Each time they saw a child in a clip, they froze, hearts racing, only to realize it wasn't them. Tired officers sipped coffee, their eyes red from lack of sleep. Still, they refused to rest. They knew that the first 48 hours were the most critical in cases like this. Every passing moment felt like sand slipping through an hourglass. Back at home, Sarah sat in the living room, unable to sleep. The television was still on, replaying her own emotional plea from earlier. She whispered to herself, "Please come home, please come home." Her heart ached as she imagined her boys' laughter echoing through the halls again. David sat beside her, silent. His mind raced with questions he couldn't answer. Where were they? Who had seen them last? Were they safe? He clenched his fists, silently promising that he would not stop searching until his sons were found. The town's streets were quiet, but they no longer felt peaceful. Every shadow seemed suspicious, every sound made hearts jump. Behind closed doors, families hugged their children tighter, realizing how fragile safety could be. As midnight approached, the search parties returned one by one, exhausted and empty-handed. Volunteers promised they would be back at dawn. Police officers gathered in the command center, marking the areas they had already covered and planning where to search next. The parents, though weary, clung to each other. Hope was fragile, but it was still there. They believed that their boys were somewhere out there, waiting to be found. And somewhere far from the community, unknown to everyone searching, a clue was waiting to be discovered. A clue that would change everything. But for now, the night ended in silence, and the waiting continued. The third morning arrived with tired eyes and heavy hearts. The town felt frozen in time. People went through the motions of their daily routines, but their minds were elsewhere. Mothers gripped their children's hands a little tighter on the way to school, neighbors whispered updates in hushed voices, and shopkeepers taped more missing posters on their windows. The faces of Michael and Ethan had now become a symbol of fear and hope, staring back from every corner of the town. At the command post, detectives reviewed everything again. They traced the boys' path from the school to the crossing guard. They studied the wooded area where the trail had ended. They even drove through neighborhoods at slow speed, scanning driveways and yards for anything unusual. But still, there was nothing. The parents, Sarah and David, barely had the strength to stand, but they refused to stop. They walked through the crowds of volunteers, thanking each person who showed up. Some hugged Sarah tightly, whispering, "We'll find them." Others gave David firm handshakes, silently promising they wouldn't give up. By mid-morning, the story had reached beyond the state. National news stations picked it up, replaying footage of the parents' tearful appeals. Families from faraway places prayed for the boys, while social media spread their photos across the country. What had once been a local tragedy had now become a story watched by millions. But in the middle of all this, a quiet moment of fate was about to unfold. Miles away from the small suburban neighborhood, life inside a busy casino carried on as usual. Bright lights flashed, slot machines rang, and dealers shuffled cards at tables filled with customers. The world inside the casino was a stark contrast to the anxious quiet of the town. Angela, a casino worker, was finishing the last hour of her late-night shift. She had been employed there for years, mostly working behind the scenes, and was known for her sharp eye and quiet dedication. That morning, she was tired. Her feet ached from standing, and she longed for her bed. She walked past the security office, where several screens displayed live footage from cameras scattered around the casino and its parking lots. Normally, she barely glanced at the screens. But something unusual caught her attention. On one of the monitors, a car sat parked under a dim light. It wasn't the car itself that made her pause, it was the sight inside it. Two small figures sat in the back seat. They looked like children. Angela leaned closer. The camera quality wasn't perfect, but she could see enough. One child leaned against the window with drooping eyes, clearly exhausted. The other sat upright, looking around nervously, as if unsure of what to do. Their faces were pale, their expressions frightened. At first, Angela told herself it was nothing. Parents often left children in the car while they went inside quickly. She thought maybe it was just that. But then a memory flashed in her mind, the news reports she had seen earlier. She remembered those posters. The faces of the two missing boys. The resemblance was too close to ignore. Her heart began to race. She looked again at the screen, her breath catching in her throat. Could it be them? She whispered to herself. Angela debated for a moment. What if she was wrong? What if these were just random kids waiting for their parents? But what if she was right? Could she live with herself if she ignored it and later found out those children were the missing boys the whole country was searching for? She took a deep breath and walked into the security office. "Can you zoom in on that car?" she asked, pointing at the monitor. The guard adjusted the camera. The image sharpened just enough for her to be certain the children looked far too much like Michael and Ethan. Their tired faces mirrored the photos she had seen. Angela felt her pulse quicken. She turned to the guard and said firmly, "Call the police. Right now." The security guard hesitated for a moment but then picked up the phone. Within minutes, officers were dispatched to the casino. Angela stayed near the monitors, unable to tear her eyes away from the screen. Every second felt longer than the last. She whispered prayers under her breath, hoping she wasn't too late. The minutes dragged. Patrons in the casino continued laughing, playing, and drinking, completely unaware of the tension growing in the security office. Angela's hands shook as she clutched the edge of the desk. Finally, Flashing lights appeared on another screen as police vehicles pulled into the parking lot. Officers approached the car slowly, flashlights in hand. Angela pressed closer to the monitor, holding her breath. The moment was surreal. She watched as one officer gently tapped on the window. The children startled, their faces illuminated in the beam of the flashlight. And then, clear as day, the features matched. It was them. It was Michael and Ethan. Angela gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Tears welled in her eyes as relief washed over her. She had been right. She had seen what others might have overlooked. Inside the car, the boys looked frightened but alive. The officers carefully opened the doors, speaking softly to calm them. One child clung to the other, unwilling to let go. Though they were weak and hungry, they were safe in that moment, surrounded by people who cared. Angela felt her knees grow weak. She sat down, tears rolling down her cheeks, realizing she had played a part in something far greater than her ordinary day. She had helped save 2 young lives simply by paying attention when it mattered most. Back at the command post, word spread quickly. Officers rushed to inform David and Sarah. The parents, who had been sitting in silence, jumped to their feet when they heard the words, "We found them." Sarah's hands flew to her face as tears poured down. David grabbed her, both laughing and crying at the same time. The nightmare that had held them prisoner for 3 long days was finally breaking apart. Their boys had been found alive. The relief spread through the town like wildfire. Volunteers cheered, reporters rushed to deliver the news, and strangers who had prayed for the boys smiled through their tears. But at that very moment, as joy erupted, questions began to stir. Who had left the boys in that car? Why were they at the casino? And how had no one noticed them before? For now, though, those questions could wait. The most important fact was that the 2 brothers, who had vanished and left a community in despair, were alive. And it was because one ordinary worker noticed something extraordinary in the middle of her routine. The story was far from over, but hope had finally returned. The flashing lights of the police cars lit up the casino parking lot like a stage. People walking past stopped in confusion, whispering and pointing. Few knew what was happening, but those close enough to see sensed that it was something serious. Inside the car, Michael and Ethan sat huddled together. Their clothes were wrinkled, their faces pale, and their eyes filled with fear. The moment the officer opened the door, Ethan clung tightly to his older brother's arm, while Michael tried to stay strong, whispering, "It's okay, we're safe now." The officers knelt down so they wouldn't seem frightening. "Hey, it's all right. You're safe now. We're going to take you back to your parents," one of them said gently. They handed the boys water bottles, which the children drank eagerly. After 3 long days, it was the first taste of safety they had felt. Angela, watching from inside the security office, let out a long breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her heart swelled with relief. She turned away from the monitor, wiping tears from her cheeks. In her mind, she could already hear the joy of the parents who would soon hold their children again. As police escorted the boys to safety, detectives turned their attention to the car. The vehicle was registered to a man who worked as a dealer inside the casino. He had been on shift at one of the card tables that very night. While the children were now safe, there were questions that demanded answers. Why were the boys in his car? How had they ended up there? And what had happened during those missing days? The officers moved quickly but carefully. They didn't want to create panic inside the casino, but they knew they had to act. 2 detectives approached the table where the man was dealing cards. With calm voices, they asked him to step aside. Patrons looked around in confusion, but the man forced a smile, pretending it was routine. Outside, the officers spoke with him quietly, asking direct questions. At first, he claimed he didn't know anything about the boys. But when pressed, his story began to shift. He said he had seen them wandering and had meant to help them. Yet the evidence of the boys being in his car told a different story. Meanwhile, Michael and Ethan were taken to a quiet room inside the casino where paramedics checked their health. Both boys were tired and hungry, but miraculously unharmed. When asked gently by one of the officers what had happened, Michael's voice was soft and hesitant. He explained that a man had spoken to them near the playground after school. He had told them he would give them a ride, and before they realized what was happening, they were far from home. The officers didn't push for more. The boys had already been through enough. What mattered most in that moment was that they were alive and safe. Back at the command post, the news arrived like thunder. A call came in over the radio, "We have the boys. They're safe." Everyone froze for a second, unsure if they had heard correctly. And then the room erupted. Officers hugged each other, volunteers cheered, and someone shouted, "Call the parents right now." David and Sarah were sitting in a small side room when a detective entered, his face lit up with emotion. "We found them," he said simply. Sarah gasped and covered her mouth, tears spilling instantly down her cheeks. David staggered back, his knees weak, before pulling her into his arms. They cried together, their hearts filling with relief and disbelief all at once. After 3 endless days of waiting, praying, and fearing the worst, their nightmare was breaking apart. They were rushed to the casino, where officers had arranged a private reunion. As soon as Sarah saw her boys, she fell to her knees, wrapping them in her arms. Ethan buried his face in her shoulder, while Michael clung tightly to David, whispering, "I missed you so much." The parents held them, refusing to let go, rocking them gently as tears streamed down their faces. The reunion was so powerful that even the officers nearby wiped their eyes. Angela stood at a distance, watching the family embrace. Though she wasn't part of the hug, her heart felt full knowing she had played a role in bringing them back together. News of the rescue spread across the town within minutes. Neighbors who had been praying for days broke into applause when they heard the announcement. Churches rang their bells. People hugged each other in relief. Social media exploded with the headline, "Missing Boys Found Safe After 3 Days." But as the celebration unfolded, detectives continued their work. They examined the car, collected evidence, and questioned witnesses. It became clear that the dealer had been hiding the boys while he continued working, unsure of what to do next. His intentions remained unclear, but what mattered most was that the children had been discovered before harm came to them. For the town, the rescue was both a moment of joy and a sobering reminder of how fragile safety could be. Parents held their children tighter that night. Volunteers who had searched through fields and woods felt a weight lift from their hearts, knowing their efforts hadn't been in vain. The community organized a gathering in the park to celebrate the boys' safe return. Hundreds showed up, holding balloons, candles, and signs that read "Welcome home, Michael and Ethan." The family stood on a small stage, thanking everyone who had helped. Sarah's voice trembled as she said, "We could never have survived this without all of you. Our family is whole again because of your prayers and your love." David added, "And to the woman who noticed what no one else did, thank you. You gave us back our sons." He looked directly at Angela, who had been invited to the event. The crowd erupted in applause as Angela blushed, overwhelmed by the gratitude. Though the road ahead would be one of healing, the boys were finally home. And the lesson was clear: sometimes, it only takes one pair of watchful eyes to change everything. The case itself would continue in the hands of the authorities. They would handle the investigation, the evidence, and the answers to the many questions still hanging in the air. But for the family, the most important part was already resolved. Their children were safe. Their family was together. That night, for the first time in 3 days, Sarah tucked Michael and Ethan into their beds. She kissed their foreheads, whispering, "You're home now. You're safe." David stood in the doorway, his eyes filled with gratitude as he watched his sons drift into peaceful sleep. The silence in the house, once painful, now felt comforting. It was no longer the silence of absence, but the quiet of safety. For the first time in days, Sarah and David allowed themselves to rest. And in the casino worker's small apartment across town, Angela lay in bed with a peaceful heart. She wasn't rich or famous, but she had made a difference. She had trusted her instincts and acted when it mattered most. The breakthrough had been found, and the story that once seemed destined for tragedy had turned into one of hope and relief. The morning after the boys were found, the town awoke to a new kind of silence. It was no longer the heavy, fearful silence of the past 3 days, but a calm, peaceful one. The birds seemed to sing louder, the sun felt brighter, and even the air seemed lighter. People greeted each other with relieved smiles. Strangers exchanged nods as if to say, "We made it through this together." In their home, Sarah and David experienced a joy that words could barely describe. For the first time in days, they awoke to the sound they had feared they would never hear again, the giggles of their boys. Michael and Ethan were in the kitchen, sitting at the table, munching on cereal as though life had returned to normal. Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she watched them, while David placed a hand on her shoulder and whispered, "They're really home." Yet, while the family celebrated, everyone knew the journey wasn't over. 3 days of fear and uncertainty had left deep marks. Michael, though trying to be brave, sometimes froze when he heard sudden noises. Ethan clung to his mother more than usual, unwilling to let her out of his sight. But Sarah and David, filled with love and relief, promised themselves they would give their boys all the time and care they needed to heal. The community also wanted to celebrate the miracle. That evening, a large gathering was held in the town park. Hundreds of people arrived carrying balloons, banners, and signs that read "Welcome home, Michael and Ethan." Children held flowers, while adults carried candles. The atmosphere was filled with joy, laughter, and the sweet sound of togetherness. On a small stage, the family stood before the crowd. Sarah spoke first, her voice trembling but filled with gratitude. "These past 3 days were the hardest of our lives. We were broken with fear, but all of you held us up with your prayers, your love, and your efforts. We will never forget it." David followed, his words steady but emotional. "Our boys are safe because of all of you. You searched, you prayed, you shared their faces with the world. And above all, one person noticed something that no one else did. To Angela, thank you. You gave us back our sons." The crowd turned to where Angela stood, humble and quiet. The applause that followed was thunderous. People cheered, clapped, and even shouted her name. Angela blushed deeply, never having been the center of attention in her life. She simply nodded, smiling shyly, overwhelmed by the love shown to her. The event continued with music, prayers of thanks, and even laughter as children played freely once again. It was as if the community had been holding its breath for days, and now they could finally exhale. The days that followed brought healing in many forms. Neighbors dropped off meals at the family's home, knowing Sarah and David were still too emotionally drained to cook. Teachers welcomed the boys back at school with gentle hugs and reassurances. Classmates made cards decorated with drawings and words like "We missed you" and "So glad you're back." Detectives continued their investigation, gathering details and evidence, but they did so quietly, ensuring the family could focus on recovery. They praised the courage of the boys, who, despite being frightened, had remained close to one another the whole time. Michael had comforted his younger brother through the long hours, telling him stories and reminding him that their parents would never stop looking for them. Ethan, though younger, had tried to stay cheerful for Michael's sake, cracking small jokes to make him smile. For Sarah, those details brought tears to her eyes. "Even when we weren't there, they had each other," she whispered. "That bond is what saved them." As the weeks passed, life began to find a new rhythm. The boys played in the yard again, though never far from their parents' sight. Sarah often sat on the porch, watching them, her heart swelling with gratitude each time she heard their laughter. David, who once thought nothing could shake his steady nature, now found himself pausing more often, taking deeper breaths, and cherishing the smallest moments. Angela's life also changed in ways she hadn't expected. People recognized her in grocery stores, thanking her for what she had done. Strangers stopped her in the street just to shake her hand. The casino management honored her with a special award, calling her a local hero. But Angela, in her quiet way, always replied the same, "I just did what anyone should do. I paid attention." Her words became a lesson for many. Parents reminded their children to trust their instincts, teachers encouraged students to speak up if something seemed wrong, and neighbors looked out for each other more than ever before. The story of Michael and Ethan wasn't just about two boys being found, it became a reminder of how one person's awareness could save lives. Months later, as life grew more normal, the family decided to take a small trip together. They went to the beach, where Michael collected seashells and Ethan built sand castles. Sarah and David sat side by side, holding hands, watching their children play. The waves crashed gently on the shore, washing away the pain of the past. That evening, as the sun set over the water, David looked at his wife and said softly, "We almost lost everything. But now, we've been given another chance. I'll never take a single day for granted again." Sarah nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "Me neither," she whispered. The boys ran back to them, their laughter carried by the wind. Sarah pulled them close, kissing their heads, while David wrapped his arms around all three. In that embrace, under the golden sky, the family felt whole again. Back in town, people still spoke of the case. It became part of local history, a story retold to remind everyone that miracles do happen, even in the darkest hours. The community had been shaken, but it had emerged stronger, bound together by love, hope, and vigilance. For Michael and Ethan, childhood slowly returned to normal. There were still nightmares sometimes, moments when the fear came back, but with time, love, and patience, those faded. They grew closer than ever, their bond unbreakable, forged in those 3 difficult days. And Angela, the casino worker who noticed what no one else did, continued with her life quietly, still working her shifts, still greeting people with her gentle smile. Yet she carried with her a truth that she would never forget, that sometimes, even the simplest act of paying attention can change the course of destiny. In the end, the story of the 2 little boys was not one of despair, but of hope, resilience, and the power of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. The town that once trembled in fear now carried the memory of a miracle, one that reminded them all to hold their loved ones a little closer and to never underestimate the value of a watchful heart.